everybody, it's me, Gemma again. Welcome back to our YouTube channel. Now yesterday would have been my mum's birthday and she would have been 72. My mum's birthday is always very difficult for the family, not just for me and my brother, but also for my auntie, because some of you may know that my mum was an identical twin. Here they are in their early years doing a spot of modelling and they look absolutely stunning together. Mum, or Nana Rosie, passed away in August 2018 from a very rare neurological condition called PSP, which is progressive supranuclear palsy. So for today's video, I thought I'd do a little bit of PSP awareness and also what we experienced as a family. For anybody that has never heard of the condition before, or maybe their relative has just been diagnosed and they don't really know what the next stages are. But before we get into all of that and get very deep, I just wanted to say it's so fantastic that this video is being sponsored by Ruler Care. Ruler Care is a wonderful healthcare agency covering areas of Suffolk, Essex and Cambridge. Ruler Care provides amazing qualified, reliable and flexible temporary staff, nurses and healthcare assistants to nursing and residential homes when needed. Also offering BACP registered counselling support too. All staff are DBS checked, including the director, who is a nurse practitioner himself, so he understands the importance of high standards of care and regards all staff and clients as part of the Ruler Care family. They are also opening and offering domiciliary care, which for those of you who don't know, that is at-home help, whether it's preparing meals, helping with medication, wash routines and bathroom breaks, to 24-hour assisted care. Ruler Care will send nurses and carers to you. You can find them on Instagram, Facebook and their website, which is www.rulercareltd.co.uk. Progressive supranuclear palsy, or PSP for short, is a very rare progressive condition of the brain. It occurs when the tau protein overcreates, builds up and damages brain cells. The tau protein naturally appears in our brain anyway to help it function, but your system breaks down the protein before it reaches high levels. When the body doesn't break down the tau protein, it starts forming harmful clumps. Now the location of the clumps, the size of them and how many there are, it all varies, and that's why there's so many different symptoms, and this is why PSP is always misdiagnosed. The PSP Association estimates that there are around 4,000 people currently living in the UK with PSP, but it's thought that the figure is untrue and there could be many more cases, but they're just being misdiagnosed. I get very passionate about this subject because we knew, the whole family knew that something was wrong with Mum, but we just couldn't put our finger on it. We got told that she was suffering from depression, that she maybe had Alzheimer's, she possibly even had Parkinson's disease, but they were all assumed diagnoses and no one was really hitting the nail on the head with what was wrong. PSPA is the only UK charity dedicated to improving support and information with people living with PSP and CBD, while supporting research into treatments and ultimately a cure, but they rely entirely on donations. Their logo is the hummingbird. In MRI scans of the brain, PSP shows itself in the form of a hummingbird, a certain area called the midbrain. It has a group of cells, and when PSP affects it, the damaged cells leave a shape in the midbrain, which is very similar to the hummingbird. It has the beak, the head, down to the body, and then there's certain cells behind it which kind of look like fluttering wings. Now, what I'm about to tell you is a very personal journey that my family went through in finding a diagnosis for Mum. I'm hoping that this might help others. My father passed away from cancer 15 years ago in 2006. and my mum was just 57 years old at the time. As you can imagine, that devastated the family. Mum spent years and years afterwards searching for Dad through psychics, through mediums, going to spiritual church. It was almost like she couldn't live without knowing that he was around. In 2009, I met my now husband, and in 2010 we decided to move in together. It was quite a hard decision to make. I didn't want to leave Mum, but her behaviour had started getting a little bit difficult, and it wasn't a nice environment for us all to live in. And I kind of thought that if we moved out, it would give her an opportunity to have her own space and do things the way that she wanted to do, and she didn't have to worry about myself or my husband around. Clearly, Mum felt very differently about this. So after talking with my brother, they agreed that they were going to open up a B&B nearer to her twin sister so that she could spend more time with that side of the family. To open up a B&B, it was the perfect opportunity for Mum to get back in touch with the public, because she was a really good people person, and it would give her a sense of belonging, and she would be living and spending so much quality time with her two grandchildren. A few years had flown past, and I started receiving these text messages and phone calls from my brother saying there's something wrong with Mum. He thought it was just settling in nerves, or that Mum was still mourning after Dad, but it wasn't. It was very, very odd behaviour. He would give me an example, like it was the day of the health inspection at the B&B, and obviously, as you guys know, with a health inspection, everything has to be cleaned. It has to be spotless, okay? So the main area was the kitchen, the dining room, where you're preparing food and where you're serving the food. Everything had to be immaculate. But Mum thought that the garden wasn't presentable enough. So she went out literally minutes before the health inspector arrived. She went out, she de-weeded all of the flower beds, but instead of washing her boots and her tools and putting the weeds in the bin and washing her stuff in the outside tap, she then walked her muddy boots all the way through the B&B to the main kitchen, to the main sink, and started washing her boots, the gardening tools, and washing the weeds that she had just picked out of the garden. Obviously, my brother walked in and was just really confused about the whole entire thing. He would also tell me that the lights above her head were hurting her eyes. She would often get very confused, and she would spend a lot of time in her bedroom too. She would get irritable very quickly, slightly paranoid, and wouldn't really show that much of an interest to the B&B. So my brother thought that maybe it was the stress of the B&B. It was getting too much, and that Mum, being around 64 at the time, should maybe just retire and let him and his family run the B&B, and she can just do whatever she wanted to do. And personally, I thought that was a great idea. Mum then spent most days pottering about. She went on trips with her local friends. She would go on holiday with her sister, and she would travel across the country to visit me and my husband. She spent her 65th birthday with us in Woodbridge, but we could tell that something was off with her. She didn't like the lights on at all, and she kept sneaking off to her bedroom. She was very, very unsteady on her feet, which didn't really give her that much confidence, and her logical thinking was backwards. It wasn't her memory that was the problem. It was like she couldn't follow instructions anymore, and her thought process for things had changed. She couldn't process information anymore. Mum had a sort of defense mechanism, so whenever something like that happened and we all got a bit confused and we asked if she was alright, she would always start giggling, because I think she secretly knew that there was something wrong, but it was like a distraction from what was happening. So On her way back from the B&B, driving across the country, she actually had a car crash, and that rippled the family and knocked her back because the doctor told her that he doesn't think that she should drive anymore, which took so much of her independence away from her. But she was in denial, guys. She was in complete denial that anything was wrong. She was absolutely fine. My poor brother then went through another year of bizarre behaviour, to which he finally convinced her to go to the doctors because he didn't know if this was like early signs of dementia or something. You know, we were looking for anything, just an answer so that we knew how to deal and handle Mum. But she insisted to the professionals that she was absolutely fine and that my brother was being overprotective. One morning, she couldn't get out of bed. She was very, very dizzy. Her eyes hurt. She couldn't stand. She kept falling over, and my brother panicked naturally and called an ambulance. Now, when the paramedics rocked up, she just drifted out of her bedroom and full makeup, dressed, and told them that everything was fine and that my brother was just being a bit dramatic and shouldn't have called them. After that situation, my brother and I spoke because my mum's paranoia really grew and thought that he was out to get her. So I spoke to him, and my brother had planned to go away with the family, invited Mum, but she didn't want to go. So I said I'd drive down with my husband and we'd go and visit her while she was at the B&B. Now when we got there, Mum just wasn't Mum anymore. Because no doctor had given her a final diagnosis and she was still a bit of a mystery to them, the only thing that I could think of was that the B&B was just too much for her head to handle and it was stressing her out. So I said to her, well, why don't you pack a few bits and pieces and come back and stay with us for a few weeks? You know, properly clear your head. And then it gave me, or hoping to give me, an opportunity to talk to her and maybe get her to realise that something was wrong. So weeks turned into months, and I finally managed to convince her, or for her to admit that something was wrong. And I took her to the doctors, and the doctors said that she was suffering from severe depression and she needed to go on a 12-week course up at the university. But things were getting worse. They weren't getting better, they were getting worse. She was complaining that she was dizzy every time she stood up, and she pretty much fell over every time she tried to get up off the sofa. And I had just found out I was pregnant. My auntie, her twin sister, we agreed that Mum was to stay with her over the Christmas and New Year period because I needed to go and visit other family members and I kind of needed a break from looking after Mum. Now this was very, very hard and difficult for her sister because my brother and I had told her about Mum's behaviour and actions and the way that she was, but until you see it, you just don't know or don't realise the severity of the situation. Mum's speech was very quiet and her vocabulary had limited. She struggled to eat and her hand-eye coordination had pretty much gone. She would scare us most of the time because pretty much every time she would eat, she would choke. Even if you really, really mashed things up, she'd still be coughing and you'd have to smack her on the back and make sure that she took some water and she was okay. Mum then went through stages of trips and falls, and her first big fall was when she fell in the garden. And I came home from work and I looked at her and she hadn't even realised that she had broken her collarbone, dislocated her shoulder and broken her wrist, but she hadn't realised. She had no idea that she'd done it. I took one look at her and saw that her fingers were down her thigh near her knee and just rushed her straight up to A&E. This thankfully put a red flag against her name up at the hospital. So we managed to get some home help, a bit like ruler care. We had nurses and carers that would come in, help her with her lunch, help her with medication, helping her to the bathroom. A few weeks later, she then fell down the stairs. I came rushing in because I could hear her calling, and she was sat perfectly on the floor. I think she was in shock. Her foot was pointing in the opposite direction and she'd broken her ankle. And she just calmly looked at me, giggled and said, "I think I've broken my ankle." "Yes, Mum. Yes, you have broken your ankle." But I was about 2 to 3 months pregnant at the time, and if I'm honest, this really panicked me and really scared me, because what if I was behind her on the stairs and she fell on me? How was I going to pick her up in the middle of the night when she would get up to go to the bathroom and she'd fall down? How was I going to be able to pick her up when I was going to be the size of a house? She went to regular physiotherapy sessions up at the hospital for her wrist, her arm and her ankle. It was very clear that they were concerned about her falls, her behaviour and her lack of movement, so they referred Mum to a neurologist. A few days later we got an appointment through to go up to the hospital, and that's where we met a professor from the Cambridge University Hospital, and his specialist field was dealing with rare brain conditions. He put her through a bunch of really simple tests, like kind of childlike tests, showing her a seal and saying, "What is this?" Now, it wasn't a test for memory because she knew the answer, but it was trying to get her brain to focus on something and then be able to express it and communicate it. Obviously, she failed all the tests, and the doctor said, "I just have one more test for you." He brought his pen and he said, "I'd like you to follow this pen with your eyes. Don't move your head, just your eyes." Anyway, he moved it side to side and she did it absolutely fine. He lifted it up and down and her eyes just stayed focused, stayed still. They couldn't move up and down, and that was it. He said, "There you go. That's your mum's diagnosis. She's got a condition called PSP, Progressive Supranuclear Palsy." And that was it, guys. It had finally hit us, an actual true diagnosis to what Mum had got. Now, when I told the rest of the family and we looked up the conditions, it was spot on. It was almost as if all those stages were exactly what Mum had been going through and where we are right now. So the doctor took her on for him and him alone, and he warned us and went through what was going to be the future for Mum, which obviously wasn't good. So to recap, guys, here are some of the main symptoms of PSP. Problems with balance, mobility and frequently falling. Changes in behaviour such as irritability and apathy, which is a lack of interest. Muscle stiffness, an inability to control eye and eyelid movement, including focusing on specific objects or looking up and down at something. Slowness of thought and some memory problems. Slow, quiet and slurred speech and difficulty in swallowing. So I'm just going to read you a few bits and pieces that I've gathered together from the PSP Association website and from the NHS website as well. So the condition has been linked to changes in certain genes, but these genetic faults aren't inherited, and the risk to other family members, including children and siblings of someone with PSP, is very low. It's kind of like a freak of nature, and the rate of the symptoms progress can range widely from person to person. There's no single test for PSP. Instead, the diagnosis is based on a pattern of your symptoms. Your doctor will try and rule out other conditions that have very similar symptoms, such as Parkinson's disease. A large number of possible symptoms of PSP also make it difficult to diagnose correctly and can mean it takes a while to get a definitive diagnosis. So you may need to have a brain scan for other possible causes of your symptoms, as well as tests of your memory, concentration and ability to understand language, which is what Mum went through. The diagnosis must be made or confirmed by a consultant with expertise in PSP. This will usually be a neurologist. This is a specialist in conditions affecting the brain and nerves. So the condition is very cruel, not only for the patients but for the families too. As PSP progresses, it sort of creates a locking effect for the person. So what I mean by that is that they are aware of everything, they know what's going on, they know what's happening, they can hear you, they can understand you, but they can no longer talk and they can no longer move. And I don't just mean walking, I mean they're pretty much paralysed. This is probably the saddest thing about this, is that there is currently no cure for PSP. The average life expectancy for someone with PSP is around 6 to 7 years from when their symptoms first start, but it can be shorter because the time span of when you pick up those first symptoms can really vary from person to person. So in honour of Mum's PSP journey, I've been working on a little something throughout this video. Mum passed away in her sleep at 69 years old. She was a wonderful mum, sister, auntie, cousin and grandma, or Nana Rosie, to 4 amazing grandchildren. Mum was the modern day Mary Poppins and the inspiration to love of beauty, and I miss her every day.
Hello everyone.
I'm well.
I'm well.
Hope you all are happy.
Hope you all are happy.
Love Rosie.
Love Rosie.
Big cheesy grin.